Ms. Bayliss, on the equality budgeting, obviously it's something I strongly support and co-authored the submission that went to Ministers Noonan and Howlin. I mean, as Dáil deputies and Oireachtas senators, the most striking thing for me was that we got the ESRI report on income distribution of the budget 4 days after the finance bill was signed into law. And all that I see really, not all, but one of the main things I see the equality budgeting campaign looking for is nothing more than saying, surely members of the Oireachtas could have that kind of analysis on budget day. Now, I've had a direct response from Minister Noonan, who's basically said no, not doing it. I haven't heard from Minister Howlin yet, but if he has also said no, I'm willing to bet that they're the only 2 members of the Oireachtas who don't believe that members of the Oireachtas should have the right information. You know, I mean, Fianna Fáil obviously support it, Sinn Féin obviously support it, I'd say the vast majority of independents support it. I'm going to hazard a guess and say most Labour Party members support equality budgeting. So regardless of what one's perspective is on whether there should be more or less equality, I'm guessing that Ministers Noonan and Howlin are the only 2 of the 226 of us who are publicly stating that we shouldn't even be given the information to know what the budget that we're voting into law is going to do. I find it extraordinary. And Chair, I think it's fantastic that this committee is taking this up. And this committee could be the conduit to actually applying a bit of pressure from the Dáil. So, Ms. Bayliss, can I ask, the response that Minister Noonan has given is basically, no, we're not willing to do it because you already get the information. Now, I have a view on the quality of that information, but can I ask you, as a member of the Equality Budgeting Campaign, do you believe that the information that is provided to Oireachtas members on budget day in the budget deck, which is what Minister Noonan is referring to, is sufficient, and does it qualify as useful and substantive quality analysis? Thank you. That's it, Chair.
Yeah, right. Well, before you come in, Louise, I suppose because I'm the last questioner, I just wanted to ask my own questions at this stage. I suppose I'm very much in favour of equality budgeting, but I don't necessarily agree with everything that your group has to say. And for example, I'm not so sure about basing it on the 9 grounds would be the approach, because for me, like yourselves, the bottom line is income equality, and you can go into the business of dividing people into sectors, and you can leave out a load of other people. Like, for example, if you, like the latest CSO income and living surveys have found the families with children, and mortgages and things like that. Like, I've met people, they're all over this country. There are couples with children and people who are single, obviously, as well, and people, alone parents and so on, who are actually insolvent and struggling to pay off mortgages. And, that kind of model wouldn't take that into account. So I personally feel that the bottom line should be income equality. Now, just to put a bit of I suppose, an alternative point of view on some of the issues you've raised, the Silk survey carried out by the ESRI is a flawed model. It doesn't include capital taxes, okay? So, there was a lot of wealth taxes brought in. I mean, the capital gains tax, the dirt tax, and so on, they have all been increased. Okay, so that isn't taken into account, and there's other taxes as well. Now, I mean, you never hear people say, but for example, there's a story in the Irish Times today, and based on a PQ I asked. In 2011, this government implemented a proposal of the previous government where basically a 90% 90% effective tax was imposed on bonuses for bankers above 20,000. Right? It's collected collected 1.3 million in 2011, and then there was no bonuses above that amount in 2012. In the same year, the threshold for ERC was increased. Last year, it was increased for wealthier people over 70. Okay, so or over 60, 65, I think it was. So, there's an awful lot of stuff, and so far, the CSO Income Living Survey hasn't showed a widening in the gaps in income. So the latest one is up 2011. Now, okay, the next one could show it. I don't know. I wouldn't prejudge it. So I'm just saying there is other information. The OECD says we have the most progressive income tax system in Europe, right? We're about the third most progressive in the world. That's because of recent changes, actually largely by the last government towards the end of its term. So, like, there are, you're putting one side of it, but there is other arguments as well. It's not as bleak, I think, as perhaps you're presenting. So, that's just to put an alternative point of view. So, if you have any comments on that, the points I've made, and I'll start with yourself, Louise, on all the questions the outstanding questions.
Okay, well, just to bring up the point about the CSO's survey and income and living conditions, and you're right, it doesn't take into account capital tax, but it also doesn't take into account cuts on public services. You brought up about the EU Silk report, the Silk report. So the Silk report, while it doesn't take into account.
Sorry, I'm thinking of the switch analysis. Sorry, the ESRI report. Sorry.
Yeah, but you brought up it doesn't take into account capital tax, but it also doesn't take into account cuts in public services, which has, been proven to have an impact on lower income.
Louise, sorry, my mistake. The Silk actually doesn't take into account. It does actually take all of the things into account. It just takes income into account. Sorry, I'm mixing up the switch and the Silk, but it's the switch is the flawed model, which is the ESRI one that Richard mentioned. Okay, so sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, again, but although it's going through, again, the point still remains, though, that a lot of these reports, while they're not taking in some of the capital tax, and you're right about that, and that's affecting the higher income, what it also isn't taking into account the impact on public service cuts, which are having on people. So if you take those two accounts, and it does actually narrow, it probably makes it more even.
If I could just, on a technicality, it does now. So the latest ERSI analysis for this year, 2014, they have brought it all in. Right now, the analysts are rerunning 11, 12, and 13 with all of the issues.
Great, well, that's good to know.
And the bottom quintile have suffered more than any other this year, in the most recent budget, so that is factual. Some of the other points, I take totally on board what you're saying about income equality. Obviously that is one of our biggest concerns is income equality. But, if you're going to talk about equality, there are other issues that can affect, access to public service and whatever. But I do agree with you, income inequality is something that is affecting people on a day-to-day living, and people are literally, in every sector. And as you quite rightly pointed out, somebody could be in a two-parent family with a mortgage and could be just as equally as poor as a lone parent, and to divide it into that can sometimes be very blunt, and what we're trying to do is try to get income equality.